A couple things. Number one, and I don't like talking about him behind his back, but I don't think he's has time or interest at the moment to come back on the show to discuss this. We've already had him on the show to discuss it. Stefan Kinsella, we talked about corporations and the ethics of, like the ethics of a company that takes massive amounts of government money and then bans people, and would it be ethical to sort of force yourself back on their service or whatever. We had a back and forth. We put out this video on Disenthrall a while back called Against Twitter's Property Rights. And it was going good, and Kinsella was watching it and enjoying it. And then at the end, I took my twist where I was kind of working at arguendo on the premise that Twitter had taken hundreds of thousands of dollars and extorted money from the government. And I was like, well, if they're doing that, then maybe I don't really care so much about their property rights. And, if they ban me, maybe I'll just create a sock account. Yeah, kind of thing. So this is his criticism. I'm going to read through it. I'm not going to punch too hard because he's not here right now to defend himself. And, if he sees this is worth a broader discussion, we can certainly have that anytime. Let's see. So I posted a video. He says, you guys started out strong and principled, but then I think you got a bit lost. Patrick is right that there is a way out of the continuum stuff. I think I got it. Plus, I think it's simply not true that the state gives money to Twitter. They don't fund Twitter. This is just your simplification of the common conservatard claim that the state is subsidizing them by granting them corporate status and/or by giving them special privileges such as the CDA 230 defamation and DMCA copyright safe harbor immunities, but the argument for both are flawed. Let me just interrupt and interject. The question we were asked in the comments that I was responding to when he says we got a bit lost was me assuming that the comment was true, which was that a company like Twitter or Facebook or Amazon gets a lot of money from the government. Whether or not that's true, I would need to do a lot of research and look that up or be provided evidence. I was not taking a position on that. I was sort of like saying, the comment was like, if they take money, then what? Well, I was like, well, if they take money, then this would be the ethical evaluation. I wasn't saying that was the case. And I was definitely talking about them taking money. I was not talking about 230 protection as subsidies, privileges as subsidies. I was talking about money. Wasn't talking about corporate status. Though people do make those arguments, but not me. I don't like those arguments. I think they're weak and I think they're faulty arguments. Okay, let me continue. But the argument for both are flawed. Hessen has shown has corporate features can be achieved by private contract and are not state privilege grants. Agreed. Corporate features can definitely be achieved by private contract and are not things that we have to have a state to provide. We've talked about that before when we talk about corporations existing in free societies. And copyright and defamation law are evil and unlibertarian. Agreed, absolutely. Full stop. So the state's refusal to apply these evil laws to Twitter et al. Is not a privilege. Agreed. Yeah, this was not my position. I was responding to a comment specifically, I think, about them taking extorted money, like government money, like specifically in Amazon. And I'm not sure on this, but I'm pretty sure, I'm very sure, that Amazon contracts with the federal government to the tune of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars at least every few years, if not every year, to provide all sorts of servers and equipment and hosting and artificial intelligence processing and all kinds of stuff. So that would be the argument that I'm talking about. Like, they are actually taking stolen resources from the government. That's what I'm talking about, not these other things. I agree with him totally on these points that he's bringing up. He says the goal of liberty is to reduce the power of the state and to eliminate the ways its regulations distort the economy, not to seek ways to classify mostly private actors as part of the state so as to justify using even more state force against them. The state is the problem. Maybe I need to go back and rewatch that. I don't remember making that argument. I don't think I've ever made the argument that the state should force against them. I think my argument was wholly related to, like, if Facebook takes a lot of government money, which I'm like 50% sure that they do. I'd have to research it. But if Facebook takes a lot of stolen money, then do I really care about violating their terms of service to create a sock account? That's what I was talking about. Like, I was not saying that the government should coerce them into allowing speech on their platform that they disagree with. I'm saying that if they take my stolen resources, then I don't really care to reciprocate property rights when it comes to making a sock account and using their servers in violation of their property consent. Like, if they're gonna violate my property, then I'm not gonna care to respect theirs in that tiny way. That was my argument. It wasn't the other stuff. I responded, you're right in that my devil's advocating was confused. It was based on comments in chat that claimed Twitter received a government contract worth over $600 million over some number of years. I don't think that is the case, so I agree with you, though I still think if a company accepts my stolen property, their right to exclude me from the use of their property must necessarily, at least to some degree, be reduced. I asked him, would you agree with that much? He says, yes, I just don't think that's the situation, which is fair. It might not be. If you start running around, this is where I do, kind of disagree with him. If you start running around classifying everyone as part of the state, we have war of all against all. This is the flaw in the original sin argument for property rights. And so he links a Rothbard article, which is good. I read it. And I agree with Rothbard. So again, I think there's some disconnect in our communication. That's why I'm talking through this here, just to make sure that, if I left him with this impression of my position from that Twitter video, I wanted to at least take a moment to clarify it again with you guys. So, does it matter if they get direct cash? I'd say no. Jace says, let me just say, I love how you help the homeless. Dude, thanks, man. You too can do it. It is not hard. Amazon runs over 2/3 of the government's hosting on AWS. I'm almost positive that's true. So, talking about Twitter, it might be a different story. I'm not sure if Twitter gets any government money. I mean, I bet they have at least a division of the company that responds and gets paid to respond to subpoenas and warrants for user information, because companies usually set up entire departments to facilitate governments getting your information out of their databases. And they usually get paid profitably for running those departments to facilitate the government's access to your private data that's on their servers. So that might be some of the ethical situation that we're talking about here. But they're under duress to cough up the information when they're subpoenaed. So that's a little bit murky and less clear. So Twitter might be a bad example for this, and that's what we were talking about on the video. So he's got some points on that. I'm not sure, and I haven't seen proof that Twitter does take government money in that way. So I said Rothbard's take on this topic as described in the Ethics of Liberty is exactly how I've been describing the principles at play 100%. How this maps onto Twitter might be a fun thought experiment. If Twitter accepts hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from people like me at government gunpoint, that property never becomes unowned. It always and continues to be rightfully owned by me, and I have the right to use escalating force on whomever possesses it to retrieve it, if I judge the cost-benefit to make that attempt desirable at any later date. So, in the case of Twitter, if it is true, I have no evidence, so this is just a thought experiment, then I can decide for myself only, just for me, I can decide for me, that until Twitter recompenses me, I have no onus probandi, pretty sure that's the legal term, onus probandi, for justification to not respect their property rights to at least a somewhat symmetrical degree, say by continuing to create accounts and use their service against their consent. If you have detailed thoughts or disagreement, we should do this on a live stream, as it is interesting and apt to many libertarians getting banned right now. He's a busy guy, so I am not surprised that he doesn't always have time to just hop on the show to talk about whatever. Let's see. He says the problem, this gets kind of interesting at the end. He says the problem is money is fungible, so over time untraceable. And you can say that everyone in society is also tainted because we touch stolen money too whenever we use a road, for example. So So I'll read what I said and maybe talk through it if I have any additional thoughts. I said, I'm not sure money is fungible enough to morph into asphalt, at least not without my consent as the damaged party. That's something that Christopher Chase Rachel's missed in his justification for building a border wall as a libertarian, was that the government extorts you and takes your money, and then that money goes and gets pooled and spent on other property, and therefore you have sort of like a rightful ownership control in the property that the government spent your money on. And that's only if I personally consent to it functioning like that. Like the property ownership doesn't transfer absent consent. So if I had money stolen from me, then I am owed money. They have my money. I want it back. Money, like if I value specific dollars that were taken from me, like specific serialized dollar bills, and those dollar bills were taken from me, and I want those specific dollars back, I have a right to get those specific dollar bills back. Now, granted, money is generally fungible, and most of us don't give a shit if it's a specific serialized dollar that we get back in restitution for a crime, sure, but that's still hinging on my consent. So it is not fungible. My stolen property is not automatically fungible absent my consent, is my first argument there. And it's certainly and certainly my consent would be required for my restitution to morph into other types of property that isn't the original property that was stolen from me. So it could only be thought to morph into I can only say that I'm using these roads as restitution if I consent to that as restitution. Anyway, that was my first point. If my money was given to a construction company, then to an asphalt supplier, then to Caterpillar for equipment, then my claim is for money against those of them that still have a portion of it. One of the problems with crime is that it's frequently so messy an activity that many times restitution or even figuring out the rightful balance books is near impossible. It would seem a reasonable standard to hold that the first or second generation theft beneficiaries are the most accountable. And that is to say, to not concern oneself as much over their property rights to some proportionate degree. I just remember, and then I link the property videos that we did. You can find them on our channels. Why is Property is a cartoon that we did, and The Parable of Sam the Thief are two videos that deal with this. The Parable of Sam the Thief talks about a multi-level theft situation in which the rightful property owners get harder and harder to sort of define. And eventually, if you add enough coercion and theft and violence, it just becomes impossible to untangle the rightful owners of everything. I think we have one more to click here. Oh, okay. There was a few more. He says, not sure how you track who has the money. After all, traceable Bitcoin is not yet in place as standard money, but also the problem is if I receive money from the feds, I view it as partial restitution, not a subsidy. I said, very true. None of what I said would apply to net tax victims. The trouble is identifying victims, he says. No one is pure due to the tentacles of the state. So unless we want a war of all against all and to renounce law and favor chaos and violence, as some libertards unfortunately do, we have to have a high bar to deem someone a criminal or ally of the state. Similar to how you need proof beyond a shadow of a doubt to convict someone of a crime. This is why I sent the original sin property title link earlier. The current possessor of land should be deemed its owner, even if the roots are murky and shrouded in some expropriation or theft in the past, unless the current possessor is himself the thief, has unclean hands, such as the state which expropriated it, or B, a descendant of the original expropriated owner can provide clear proof that he has a better claim to it than the current occupant, in which case he gets it back. In that case, the current owner would have to rely on property title insurance or something, C, and then he links property title records and insurance in a free society. But this would be very rare since in today's world, most old claims are hard to prove because records in old days are spotty and witnesses are dead and evidence is lost or stale, and in the future, now we have good records, so the problem will rarely arise. You research your title before you buy an object, and you even get title insurance, by the way, to cover that to cover problems with your research before a sale, to make sure no long-lost claimant will oust you. I don't disagree with a single thing that he's saying. I think what I'm talking about is a very specific, real-time, current events, not old property claim title. If I, and this is a one-off case, I'm not declaring a war of all against all and that everyone is dirty or unclean hands. I'm saying, like, if I can specifically draw a line, Patrick Smith, net tax victim, had more extorted than he got from, the government in restitution. And I can also draw a line from government handing extorted money to Amazon, for example. And hands more money to Amazon than, I can tell by looking at Amazon's tax returns, hands more money to Amazon than the government owes Amazon in restitution. You can tell this. Then they are net beneficiaries of extortion theft, involving me as a victim. And so that's a direct line. That's a one-off, case-by-case, direct case that I can make. I can draw the lines from victim to stolen property to transferred property to extortion beneficiary, or post facto co-conspirator of the theft of the extortion, let's say. And I'm saying that I agree, it needs to be a high standard. And I'm saying we might be able to meet it in some of these circumstances with these large companies taking massive amounts of extorted money, our extorted money. And so I'm saying if we can draw that line, I'm not saying we can, I'm not saying I have, I'm not saying I have that evidence, but if we can, hypothetically, then I don't think that I have an onus to respect this massive company's property as to a symmetrical degree, right? So, like, a small, tiny fraction of the extortion money that they got from the government, could have been mine or would have been my property, let's say, divide by the net taxpayers or whatever, net tax victims, then, maybe that equates to a quarter or $1 or something of the millions that they get. And so a symmetrical restitution would be using a Twitter account, which costs Twitter almost nothing, let's say. Anyway, that was the point I was trying to make, and it's so weird. Twitter facilitates the ability to have two people that agree on just about everything, and it still, goes on for days. Anyway, I thought it was fun to talk through, and I wanted to share my thoughts and position on that in case I left other people with a poor impression of my position like I left him. And I take the blame for that. That was on me.